Birr Union Workhouse, founded in 1842 as Parsonstown Union Workhouse, a three-storey building on a H-block plan for 800 inmates. The building, the complex was on, if you like, a hinge or a mirror plan. In other words, male on one side, female on the other side. What was the workhouse? It was the main source of social welfare for an area from Clonmacnoise to near Birrscain. It was devised as a Victorian concept of social welfare, which was indoor relief, that conditions here should be tolerable but not so comfortable that you'd want to stay. It was one of nearly 900 workhouses in the UK. We had been part of the UK since 1801, after the Act of Union. After the famine, they didn't know but there would be another famine like it, so they built 33 more, including Birrscain, which took some of the pressure off here, Donamore and Portumna. Those three were built after the famine in a different and plainer style. So the people who came to the workhouse were the poor, of course, mostly those who were dependent on labour alone, or whose farms had got so small, whose little tenancies had got so small that they couldn't live on what they could produce. Well, why the workhouses? Well, poverty. It wasn't just in Ireland. There was terrible industrial and also rural poverty in England and in Wales, of course, and Scotland. Most poverty in Ireland was rural poverty. One of the main problems was monoculture, dependence by the poor on one crop, the potato. All in all, inadequate for what happened when the Great Famine hit. It wasn't the first famine, nor indeed the first Great Famine. But this one, it couldn't be explained. The potato, as we know, is susceptible to damp. But in this case, there was a blight and nobody knew what happened, you know, where it was, what it was, or where it came from. In the main building, males and females were separated, and children over 2 years of age separated from their parents. The children slept in the attic. I came across a report where the doctor complained that the children were dying in dozens because it was so cold up there in the winter. There's no ceiling in the attic. So it was very hot in summer, very cold in winter. And the solution was to bring the children down to, I couldn't find the reference when I was looking for it. I think it was to the men's section and put some men up there. The cemetery is quite a small area. I read in about 1848-49 during the famine that the Poor Law commissioners asked that burials there would cease. It's on rising ground above the water supply for the workhouse. And so I presumed that they followed the orders from Dublin, because Dublin was very, very strict. They really imposed very strict regulations on the workhouses, as we will see. But I found a very reliable reference in 1862 that there were over 3,000 burials in that cemetery. Well, I thought surely they moved. But then I was reading very recently, and this is something that I want, people might know about. In the year 1900, on the local paper, I read that they were buying more ground to extend the cemetery, because there were already coffins which were only 6 to 12 inches under the surface, and that some of them had been broken open. The average number here, in good times, would have been, during the 19th century, would have been between 200 and 300. But as the famine wore on, for instance, in 1847, there were 619 people here in May, in the workhouse, which was built for 800. May was a lean month when the old potatoes had run out and the new ones hadn't come in yet. In the famine, there was a surplus of girls. There was hardly any employment for women at the time. Their cohort of boys had died, and many of them had died, so there was no future for these girls, no employment, no husbands for them. And they had a somewhat similar problem in England. So the government came up with a solution, which they didn't call it a solution, of course. Politically, it was that in Australia there was because it had been founded as a penal colony, so there was a surplus of men. But what the government said was that there was a great demand for female domestic servants in Australia. So the girls were asked, between 14 and 18, they were asked to volunteer. 4,175 girls, ostensibly between 14 and 18, although sometimes less and sometimes more. They had to be single, they had to be orphaned, in theory, right? They were selected and they got free passage and they got trousseaux, which were quite elaborate, really, to go to Australia, which they did. 65 in 2 batches went from Birr. Their names have survived because they survived on a shipping list. And 3 of their descendants have come back and they have visited me and they have visited and been through the workhouse, including visiting the girls' dormitory where their ancestor might have slept the last night. One of the girls was a Dooley, another was probably Dorley or Dooley, and another one was Mullen. They were from the countryside around. But their descendants in Australia are really proud of them. They meet together and they're commemorated. These girls are commemorated. President McAleese went over to open a commemoration of the Irish orphan girls in Australia.